Okay, then, workshop without melody can begin with its listening audience.
So the first,
Okay,
I
Aaron,
don't actually, did we have an order specifically? I was ready to start with the code modification for the complete overhaul. We look at one was listed first.
Yeah.
And we want to
The utility code modifications were listed first,
Okay,
yeah.
that's what I had. So back, been over a year, I think it was last fall of 18, Board of Trustees.
if we're recording, do we need the mics on?
Oh,
Yes, that helps. So a year or so ago, probably the fall of 2018, the Utility and Engineering Board was advised that there was a request to look over the administration and enforcement section of the utility code. That's mostly found in Section 13, Article 1. So Brandon went over some of the questions that the trustees had and passed those on to the board. Those are listed on that document you have that has part of it in red. So the questions that the UEB, the way they had phrased them or interpreted them, are listed first, and then I included some discussion that we had, some of the highlights that the UEB saw, and that's what I was going to go through, and we used that to develop the actual code modification that you would see in the actual packets for Ordinance 1076, I believe that one is. And one of the first ones, the town administrator does not have the power to enact administrative regulations or make interpretations on the code that may not be clear. An engineer may be the best person to do this, very, very common in various levels of government. The UEB looked through the code we had, thought for the most part that did seem pretty sufficient. We found that it did say that the town administrator shall have the immediate control and management of all matters, and so did have enough authority. And we referred, if there were some other legal concerns, you could check with a town attorney on that one. And maybe we want to go, do you want to just do questions while we're on that topic? Or do you guys want me to go through and you can always come back also?
You have an hour, over an hour, so.
And
Please.
so just keep, so
I had a quick comment there. The same issue about town engineer versus town administrator relates to the other part of this, which is the testing, the sampling board ordinance of who should supervise. If you think about it, we pretty much always have a town administrator, but town engineer, we've gone back and forth from having an actual employee town engineer to a contract town engineer. Right now we're on contract town engineer. There may not always be a town engineer available, so if you have a town administrator, they can always either use an employee or a contracted engineer to get them the technical advice they need. So it seemed like to me better to have the town administrator be the person designated, because they can always get the help they need.
and that's what the UEB also thought, was that the town administrator can appoint anyone to be the one in charge of that specific.
Sometimes we include or his or her designate.
Yeah,
It's
designate.
throughout the rest of the code. Town administrator or designate.
Number 2, add enterprise fund declarations to each utility section. When we did the stormwater, there was some code included that specifically said this fund is an enterprise fund. So we did modify the wastewater to include that declaration when we did modifications to the wastewater previously. We have not done that to the water and the electric funds section of the code, but those are not found in in Article 1 of Section 13. So because they weren't in that first section, we thought we would leave that until we actually work on that section of code rather than have you guys going all over the various parts of the code, we wanted to keep it just to Article 1 if we could. It's probably easy enough to add those declaration statements if that was really desired. We did just take what was used for the stormwater, include it in the wastewater when we did that overhaul of that section last year. There was, third was to create a universal definition section.
Aaron, on that, I just handed out a sheet of comments on that. On the draft of the ordinance, the corrections we had, there's a reference to the stormwater department in 13-120 of in Article 1.
Yours, is this what you're
Yeah.
referring to?
But it's missing in the definitions of town utility department, town utility system, and department. And those all refer to the electric department, the water department, the wastewater department, but they don't say anything about the stormwater department. And so if we're going to consider that a utility, it seems like to me it belonged in those other definitions, because it's in there in one place and not in others, and that's all in Article 1.
Oh, so 13-120 has
Right.
town utility department, and in its definition, there's including stormwater department.
Yeah, it says, it references stormwater department, but then the definitions for town utility departments, town utility system, and department, each of those refer to all three other departments, but they don't refer to the stormwater department. So it seems like it ought to go in there just for the sake of completeness.
In the definition.
Yeah, just in the definitions.
And that then, right, relates also to 3, that would be another portion to add to the definition section then, but we only found one other section with definitions, and that was 13-1-160, and that was part A, subsection A included definitions, so we did move those to 13-1-10, which is where the definitions are found. Number 4 was to look at water share dedications. Currently, they were only required for annexation or subdivision. Again, this is from November of 2018 when that was first posed to us, and that was changed last year when the wastewater, actually when the, I don't know if that's annexation, section 17-14-10. Is the section of code that actually talks about what type of water shares or water rights need to be dedicated. And that was modified last year so that share is now required for any building or deed modification. Number 5 was clarification on the lien process. Other town codes might be more specific on how that should happen. So we did modify the section on that. We did remove some of the timelines for more flexibility. We found that our code was very similar to Longmont and Estes Park. The specific process for how a lien is recorded, we felt was something really only staff. We didn't think the code needed to go through the actual documenting the process on how the clerk records a lien on the property. That should be a staff functionality of how it's physically done. The UEB saw that Longmont, Estes, and Netherland do not have any mention of the line that says, prior to such certification, the town shall mail notice to the record owner of the property or premises of the town's intent to certify the delinquency. So we thought this should be also included as part of the staff process on how they're handling that. And again, left it unless there were some legal concerns for that. So in our modification, we don't have that specific line.
By the time they would get a lien notice, they would have gotten multiple notices of delinquency already, right? So.
Yeah, we don't have a set, when the lien, I think they would have 2 at least, maybe 3 notices. Number 6 was guidance on the interest for delinquent utility accounts, what amount is appropriate, can it be waived, under what circumstances, and other just review of administrative costs. So we did modify sections 13-1-150 and 13-1-180. The UEB thought the fees should stay on the rate sheet rather than be included directly in the code. Some of them were on the rate sheet. There was some of them that were in the municipal code though. So one, I believe the late fee is listed as in the municipal code. So with all the other fees being on the rate sheet, we thought that was not a rate specifically, but a fee, and could be included on the rate sheet so that you don't have to modify the code each time if you want to change that rate for some reason. Otherwise, there were other fees that were recommended for other things if the electric had to actually go out and disconnect something at the pole. Sorry, oh my goodness, I thought I put that up.
That's a good reminder.
So we thought we should keep the fees on the rate. Interest is currently set at 8%. This is the usury limitation in Colorado, so we didn't want to change that at all. I don't know if it's specifically related to utilities, but we thought there wasn't any reason to try to raise it if the state is setting that.
Mike?
Did you have a question?
No, I just wanted you to turn your mic back on.
Got one quick comment there. The way that's phrased in the draft, it first says 0.666% per month and then 8% per annum. Would it clarify things if we put like the word non-compounded in there? Because it kind of raises a question of if you do 0.66 per month, do you add that to the next month and compound it? And I think the intent is, no, it's supposed to be a flat.
It could be. That's how the code was in there already, and the UEB didn't review that portion. We didn't make a change to
That's
it.
just a suggestion, but because you referenced the monthly accrual first, you just put non-compounded, just so there's no question.
Okay.
It was better to clarify the intent if possible. So.
7 was appeals.
Just a second.
Yep.
I did have one on the administrator ability to, and I don't know if the wording would be exactly like this. So the administrator could make a decision to remove interest. Is that remove or reduce? And as it says remove, does that mean any level of interest? What?
It was left there as an administrative decision. If there was some reasoning, or if it came up that the Board of Trustees wanted to do that, they could then ask the administrator. It was really looked at as a concern for those who really didn't have the ability. Some of the big considerations were, are we really hurting somebody who can't afford to pay? And that was something that the UEB and in general the bigger picture was not trying to really hurt people. If they can't afford to pay, that they could come in and explain their situation. We do have currently some other options. I know you can go to LEAF if you have an issue, and they can come in and work with the town on your behalf.
Just one time.
Oh, one time, okay, with LEAF then.
Yeah, no, I understand that part of it, and I'm very supportive of that. It's just the technicality of, is it an on-off switch, or is it a valve?
Right, so maybe add, remove, or reduce. That would make sense. Oh, it already is in there?
In the municipal code, so.
I think so. It says waive, release, or reduce. 13-1-140.
Okay. I was just reading the wording that was here, so that, thanks.
Yeah. I've got that draft.
7 was to look at the appeals process. Current code allows appeals of basically everything. What can and can't be appealed should be clarified, and the procedures and criteria included. So we did make some modifications to section 13-1-210, and the UEB looked at the appeals section of the municipal code for Estes, Netherland, Erie, and Longmont. We were looking at what appeals should be allowed and how. Right now, the Board of Trustees is the de facto appeals body anytime someone doesn't like staff decisions. Time limit on appeals is useful, but limits people from rehashing old issues. So we thought you should have a time limit in there if you were going to allow for the appeals. And so we had a 10-day limit. We discussed adding that appeals that failed would have to cover attorney's fees, and this might help make sure that people feel they have a legitimate complaint if they were aware that if they brought an appeal and it failed, they might be responsible for the attorney's fees, and worked on spelling out the process and having a more involved procedure. So we did add quite a bit to section 13-1-210. Which if we wanted to go over that, again was in the packet with the actual ordinance change. Some of the code that we added to try to make that more thorough, spelled out so people would see when they can appeal, what the appeals process consists of, and what happens when you do bring an appeal.
And just so everyone knows, I did not alter the substance of the UEB's recommendation, but there is an issue that I've identified in this section concerning the hearing officer versus BOT, who actually hears the appeal. And you can go either way on that. I know larger jurisdictions, the BOT or the city council rarely hear these types of appeals. Usually hearing officers appointed, which either the utility director or a third party, to hear these kinds of appeals. And I think either is a valid place to go, but I didn't want to insert my own judgment into that. I wanted you guys to determine what was the proper way to go.
I had that question because one section said, shall appeal to the Board of Trustees, and the other one said the hearing officer shall.
And I didn't know the intent, so I didn't want to choose one or the other when I reviewed this.
And we've had it in the past, it's always been to the Board of Trustees. And I was going to ask a question on that. The attorney's fees portion, while that could discourage frivolous appeals, it could also discourage legitimate appeals. So the way I read this is, I guess it would be up to the Board of Trustees if they think somebody had a legitimate beef, and maybe part of it they ruled in the applicant's favor and part of it they denied it. It'd be up to the Board of Trustees to decide if they wanted to push for attorney's fees or not. Is that how it
And which
works?
section?
Well, I guess it's F. It says if the appeal is not
Okay.
found in the appellant's
Appellant's favor.
favor, appellant may be held responsible for all costs, including legal fees. So is that like Board of Trustees discretion? If they thought it was a good faith bona fide appeal, they could say, we're not going to assess attorney's fees, but if they thought if it was somebody just really had no case, they could.
Right, at this point, it was left to be open. I didn't, for the discussion, what we would want to put in there. Again, with the UEB not getting into as much of the legal of how the wording for that should be, but either the Board of Trustees or the town administrator.
Well, when you get into costs, that also raises the hearing officer question, because if you're going to potentially assess costs, if you have a hearing officer, you're going to have to pay that hearing officer, and so it's going to increase the costs. I mean, my preference would be keep it to the Board of Trustees, don't require a hearing officer, that lowers the cost even. And there haven't been that many of those. It hasn't been a big burden on the Board of Trustees. We've only had one since I've been on the board, I think. No, maybe
Two.
maybe two. The other one was kind of a mixed bag, I guess. And related to that, and something else I put in my notes, there's a requirement that you do findings of fact and conclusions of law. If the Board of Trustees is serving as the appellate body, I'm not sure you want to require the Board of Trustees to do that. I think our statements on the record and how we vote should be enough to indicate how the appeal was resolved. If you have a hearing officer, you may have the hearing officer do that, but again, that's going to be another expense. So even once you get into hearing officer, findings of fact, conclusions of law, it really is going to jack the costs up there. And I understand why big towns do it, but they also have probably lots more, in most cases, many more dollars at stake of large industries and that type of thing. And ours are, I mean, if it's an individual homeowner, to me, that's a bit too much for the town of Lyons. Anyway.
I had a question on this. With the 10-day limit, is it Is it perfectly clear when the clock starts and when it stops? Or just describe that for us.
Right, any appeal, I'd have to go through with the providing written notice of appeal within,
It's written that it's the 10 days after the effective date of the order, directive, or decision being appealed. And so, if,
Business day?
10 days. Does the code define elsewhere what a day is?
I don't know, I'd have to double check, but we could put in business days just to make it
In
easier.
case it's like over the holidays and.
Yeah, making it too short could be,
And A, I believe, is what's already there. I could go back to the red line, and we added more C, D, E, F. So that could be, that currently we're stating 10 days. Right now, it's already set to be 10 days, so we could try to make that clearer in our code by 10 business days.
I think that'd be better.
and so the, and it's clear what constitutes an appeal. You know, written on a specific form or.
Usually it's, yeah. Usually.
So it must provide a written notice of an appeal to the town clerk.
Okay, so they could just handle
Describing it.
my appeal
Yeah.
as,
Right.
which is okay, so then it's time stamped here, and then that's what starts.
10
I would
days,
think maybe
yep.
I would add here that the written notice of appeal to town clerk would, and at the end of that sentence, which identifies what decision, directive, or final order is being appealed.
And so now this would be more of a, so how we handle these changes, because we're at the workshop before first reading, normally you would hold off until second reading, or that's why I've tried to have a workshop before, so we could try to iron this out, then bring it forward. So again, we'll leave that to the new board to decide how they handle, but at this point then, are we going to try to rewrite, should I be working, or you'd have the modifications ready to go for second reading?
So there's two ways you can do it. You can do it on, the board would have to bring it as, if it's beyond, there's some minor stuff and some of these have been given, which we can fix, you know, they don't really change the substance of what's being proposed at all. Code references, that kind of stuff, we can fix that without a board motion. But for larger substantive changes, they really need to be made by the board, and if we would, I think, what would be helpful, I think, during this process, maybe collect some of these red lines that we're making, and then distribute it to the board as kind of a read out what we did, and leave it up to the board to suggest some of these changes on second reading. Alternatively, you know, we could delay this first reading, you know, make it the first reading for the next meeting, and then we could just redo, have a second go at this. Those are the two
Right.
options.
So that I'd leave it up to you guys to decide which way you want to go.
But I would be keeping,
Fine.
I'm trying to keep some red lines as we
You
go.
go,
But I think if
okay.
you want to keep a set of red lines, that'd be great. You can compare, then we can get back to DOT prior to the next meeting.
And this, at least with the recording, will help. We can
Yep.
double check.
So we could basically continue the first reading for 2 weeks, and that way, when you notice that again, we could make all
We
these.
can correct all these changes. yeah.
Well, that's if you're
both the minor
continuing.
technical stuff and
And the more substantive
Yeah, the more
stuff, so
substantive.
we could correct all of that stuff prior, you know, and then we have it,
Well, I think the question is, do you want to continue first reading on to 2 weeks, or just accept the ordinance as it is, knowing you're going to make the corrections upon second reading, which is what's been done?
we could do it, but if you're
It's up to
talking
you
about
guys.
6 different
Changes, that's,
motions, it
yep.
seems cumbersome.
So you guys can continue it on, and that means we can make the changes and bring it back for first reading in 2 weeks,
That
right?
was actually going to be my request.
Okay.
For my-
You guys just like seeing me, I know.
Right.
It's just, it's clean. It's
Right,
a much cleaner process.
I agree. I think. So I just wanted to be sure, depending on how many notes, if I have to try to then redo this because it's going to be pulled from first reading, where we should be at, but at least with the 2 weeks, we have time to come back with the changes.
I mean, what I've seen so far, most of it makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's
Right.
changes we can make pretty easily. I've already made a lot of the more minor changes in my draft at least.
So 8 was, what was the effect of entering into a payment plan? Was it temporary cure? The legal effects of this needed to be clarified. The UEB thought in the beginning, it is an agreement, so you're setting up a payment plan, and a payment plan by its nature is going to be temporary until it's paid off, then the agreement is over, is sort of the basic thoughts I think that we had, but it is, we did modify section 13-1-250. It's currently mandatory for the town to offer a payment plan. The UEB did not see any reason to change this. It is a legal agreement between the consumer and the town, and failure to follow through on the payment plan would lead to the penalties listed in the code for delinquency, such as interest or shut-off. It is temporary in that it cures the current outstanding balances owed to the town, and then the agreement ends. 9 was the need. Okay.
Comment on that too. This is something I put in these written comments I circulated. Right now, or as proposed, the code would read that if someone is delinquent on paying their utilities, they cannot be issued a town license or permit of any kind. So if you're going to do cure agreements, like I think it's 6 months for residences and 3 months for residential and 6 months for commercial. The question is, if somebody's in month 3 of say a business of their cure payments and they're current on them, and they come in and they want either a building permit or even just a basic business license or something, must that be denied? Or should we allow the town administrator discretion, if they've entered into a cure agreement and they're current on it, to go ahead and issue a permit conditioned upon them fulfilling the rest of their cure agreement? So you're in month 3 of your cure agreement, you come in, you get a building permit, but in month 4 you default. Then I think you could revoke the permit or something. That's just a
Because
question.
if they have already been in and made arrangements for late payments, you shouldn't hold up certain things, depending, on the situation. We do have a few people that are constantly in default of their payments. Those, how can you afford to do this new permit when you can't even get a business?
I agree with you, but the way it reads right now, if they're delinquent, even if
Yep.
you can't give them a permit at all,
Yeah.
that seems to
And I think there's
be pretty
situations where
harsh.
you would.
And so make
As long as
it,
they've done it right and they're on the 5th month of their 6-month payment.
I'd say make it discretionary. There may be situations where you've had somebody, this is their 5th default in the last 10 months, and you don't want to give them a permit. Look, you got to get this thing taken care of.
Think about
do
the
it.
year after the flood.
Oh, yeah.
We wouldn't be able
So
to.
anyway, I just thought there ought to be some discretion there. If we're going to allow cure agreements and make them a matter of right and somebody's performing them, I don't think if they're performing, you should automatically deny them a permit just because they're delinquent. So I suggested some language for doing that.
Okay. And then number 9, a need for a trigger to inform the Board of Trustees of excessive delinquency. And so we added another subsection to 13-1-250, and that was subsection 6, which said if a delinquent consumer's balance exceeds the amount the town administrator is permitted to approve for contracts for services, then the Board of Trustees shall be notified of the delinquent account. So the UEB had said, well, you set a limit of when the administrator needs to come to you to spend the money on any kind of contracts, right? You had it 20,000, now I don't know what, 10,000.
How
In
much
this
is
case, 10 or 20.
But what, isn't it set somewhere?
One is construction, one is professional services.
Okay.
So it's 10 or 20.
I thought we upped it.
We did to that.
It's 10 or 20 now?
So
But I think
the
you guys, if it
the
comes
UEB had
to
said that was a,
10,000 delinquent, that's probably a point we need to at least confidentially let you know.
and it was consistent then, if that changes, then this automatically would change to follow that amount. If it becomes, all of a sudden costs are quadrupled and you need to raise what the administrator can spend without coming back to you.
That sounds good. Has anybody got a suggestion whether 10 or 20 is more appropriate? Because there's two different things we could reference.
In the code I referenced is 10,000, it's currently $10,000
Okay.
for services, that's what the reference is.
All right, that's what it is. Okay.
So, but it's a different number, I I noticed that, the amount that Mr. Slaughter approves is different for services or construction, so I just chose one.
Okay.
But I'm happy to put in whatever you guys like.
That sounds good.
So are we keeping it 10 for construction too, or we changed it to 20?
It's 20 for
It
construction
is
right
20,
now.
okay.
Yeah, the draft of the UEB didn't say whether it was services or construction, but I assumed it was services, so I put that in, but I'm happy to change it to whatever.
Works for me.
Yeah, it's coming on there.
I'd stay with a lower amount. Commercial accounts can rack up, depending on what they're doing, pretty quick. And they can easily file Chapter 11, Chapter 7, anything, and then it's just a fight to get it. So I think the sooner we know, and I think that was the philosophy with the UB as we discussed this over the year and a half, that as we went through everything, that was, this is one of the ones you guys batted around back and forth a little bit. And residential account isn't gonna get that out of hand, but a commercial account can get out of hand real quick, and they can disappear real quick too.
Well,
So the sooner we know, and
You're
then,
50,000 behind. Well, there's no
Yeah.
trouble.
I think the sooner the administrator knows something, I would like the board to know, and if it's a business that everyone knows and they're good for it because they've been around for 20, 30, 40 years, great. But if I think it's pretty easy to fold up shop and go start somewhere else these days. Good lawyers, that's the way it is. So the sooner we know, the better we can get on top of it.
Yeah, help me, I'm a little slow with this, but what would be circumstances in which construction would be involved there?
Oh, no,
I don't
we're
see
just
it.
talking it.
No, I understand.
Oh,
So we're just saying 10,000
Is at my normal
because it
limit
would
before comments.
invariably be services. Right. And then the 10 and 20 would relate to your ability to approve.
No, he was just asking, what is my current spending limit? Is it 50,000?
In the code change, it was at the administrator spending limit.
Right.
And the choice was either services or construction, so I just put it at services, that's the lower number.
Which is appropriate then, because in relation to utilities, it
It's
would be
services.
services.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the last one was, there was the asking about the privacy of the utility data, under what circumstances can data be released, for what purposes. Part of that was because we have the UEB board who has been trying to look into a number of issues, and sometimes it comes down to trying to really understand what's going on and how long does it take to get all the data cleaned, to give just some listings. So there were some questions of whether or not it was okay if the utility board has already signed the non-disclosure agreements and things that have to be signed to be on a board. There may be some reason to allow that. The UEB, though, said, well, there are no state standards for municipal utilities. There are for investor-owned utilities. And we could talk to the American Public Power Association or the Colorado Association for Municipal Utilities. We had said this wasn't specifically a code modification, and to prevent any lawsuits or concerns of that, it would protect confidentiality and maybe just leave it as handled by staff. That you wouldn't be giving out a list of 10 accounts who are all in such so-and-so situation to try to see if you can clean it and say, we have 10 accounts, then we can know the numbers, but trying to really make sure we're not giving any out any personal information.
When I lived in Austin, they published in the newspaper every month during the summer the 10 largest water users and the names, and anybody could look them up. A friend of mine ended up on there one time because they had a leak in their pool and they didn't know it for going on vacation. They were horrified.
In the, I believe in the standards for the investor-owned utilities in Colorado, it's 5, the aggregation of at least 5 customers. I believe is the standard, unless you only have 5 customers, which isn't one the case, with the exception of a few very unique gas street lighting rate classes. But I believe that's the standard. I helped write them several years ago. But there are no municipal standards.
You're right. Well, I agree. It doesn't have to be in the code, I don't think.
So that was basically the workshop on the code modifications, a year and 3 months later or so. We actually were ready before, but you guys have been so busy the last couple months, we had to
Blame it on us.
wait a little bit.
I had a question concerning the appeal process, the direction from the board. So everyone's on board, the Board of Trustees should be the appeal body.
For the first. Could someone then appeal higher to a hearing officer if they wanted to pay for it? No?
You'd have to go to a court at that point.
Which is fine, I can tell you, we did take a lot of that was from Longmont. Well, sorry, I guess it's to you guys too, but just so you know, we took a lot of ours from Longmont, and being the bigger utility, we probably didn't think about the costs involved with the hearing officer. Or the UEB didn't.
Trustee Carvis.
Concerning that, I couldn't find in my notes. I cleaned my desk and I kind of lost some stuff. So. At one time we discussed that issue. I can't remember, you wanted more say, or you wanted more to come to the board, or did we at the board say we wanted less to come to us? We discussed this at one time, a year and a half ago, I mean, early in this seating of this board.
You guys had wanted it to come to you sooner.
Sooner, okay, that's how it was, okay.
If it was kind of at an impasse.
But even appeals, we're starting to get appeals on some building issues, I think still flood related at one time, and we were kind of, do you guys remember that?
You had just said if we came to an impasse that you'd rather we delegate upward than to have things unsettled at the staff
Yeah, I
level.
think
Is that
that's
what you're
right.
referring to?
But
No, I thought it was concerned his exact question. There was a lane by this board, and I can't remember which way it was we wanted less to do with hearing constant appeals, slowing down meetings. It started to slow down some meetings on a particular home that's still being recovered, that's in there denied, and we wanted more on you, or you wanted more on us? That's what I can't remember. Didn't do anything with,
I was thinking more on regard to a utility bill that was outstanding.
there was a building permit. It was a building permit issue we were dealing with. We had several hearings up.
yeah, that's true. We kind of,
So I want to keep it consistent with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
With building permit, with all, with one utility or next utility or something else in the process, do you want to hear all, does this board or a future board want to hear every appeal, or is that what the administrator and staff is for?
yeah, that's a high-level question. And, at one point, I think the board was starting to think a lot of things were coming to the board, and then
That should have been dealt.
that could have.
Could have been dealt
Could
with the
have been
staff
easily
level.
dealt with at the staff level. And the issue was getting it on the agenda. It sometimes could delay things a long time. Your agenda's pretty long too. And so I think it has to be an agreement really between the board and the administrator that says, where do we put the balance?
Well, I think, like almost everything in the code, it needs to come through my office, and then if it is not able to be resolved, to you. But I do recall now, there were several people not happy with my response, so they wanted it to come to the board.
And that's what I'm getting at, is do we want, I want to keep it consistent.
On utility accounts or building, right?
No, it was building.
It was built.
And what I'm getting at though is, well, great, so on utilities, we have one way, then building permits and other things, we have one way, and then something else, we have another way. I'm just trying to say, do we want to try to keep it consistent
Well, if you
across the
recall,
whole
The
code of,
building inspector is
fine,
he is the final.
yeah.
If
It
it's
should be a building board of appeals process as well.
I don't know that we have a building.
Is the BOA, so is the BDOA though? I don't know. So I don't know, most places have a building board of
Well,
appeals.
we don't have hearing officers and findings of facts and conclusions of law for building permit appeals.
It was us.
I know.
So that's what I'm saying is, are
Well,
we
we
keeping
can
it
respond to
consistent?
that by saying, let's start using hearing officers and hiring them and making people pay the costs and having them do findings of fact. You dealt with it another way, which is, try to resolve more
Yeah.
things at the staff. And this is the same way. Most of the utility disputes get resolved at the staff level. It's fairly rare, I think.
I do too.
I only know the last two, but
I'm just asking,
in years
keep
before
it
the last
consistent across
two,
the-
were there, have there been that many utility appeals?
No, I'd say maybe there's one every other year or something, it's pretty rare.
So it happens back to back to back next year.
Yeah, watch it, yeah, we'll probably get
Well,
So, but Victoria, I mean, do you have a strong sense of what it is that, from the administrative standpoint, that you want?
Well, of course, I'd like it to be resolved at the staff level
Okay.
first, so that you don't have to address that. That's not your primary role. But if there's someone who feels they've been wrong, that's another issue than wanting the code to be changed for their situation.
Okay, but what
Those
is,
are two different.
and what do you want to be the trigger point? Like at what point in your
I
mind?
think we'd be at a point where both the applicant and myself agree that we need another view of it, potentially. But if the code's written in black and white and the person just doesn't like it, that should not be a reason to come to you. That should be a reason to bring forward a reason for a code change or something, but not an exemption to their situation. If it's they feel that I didn't apply it correctly, then that might be another issue. But I think they started to become, this shouldn't pertain to me. Because the staff is always, just like we do in all our staff reports, whether or not we agree with it, our recommendation is whatever the code says. So we're going to continue to do that. And in some cases, someone might come to you and say, this shouldn't apply to me, and that's really not the correct way. This code should be changed to reflect my situation, and then decide. So there's a slight difference there. But no, I want it to go to staff level first, and then if the staff and the person agree we need a further interpretation and the attorney can help us, then the board might be appropriate.
So then it would change the timing. We'd have to change A of this, right? Because right now, any final order, directive, or decision of the town administrator relating to administration or enforcement of this chapter may be appealed to the Board of Trustees by providing written notice of appeal to the town clerk within 10 days. And we're saying we don't want it to be just that, right? Because according to that, it sounds like to me all you do is give your written notice, the town clerk gets it, and within 10 days it's got to be to the board regardless. So you'd want to change.
That the town administrator's made a final decision. I mean, they could just go,
Right.
She said, I can't do anything else, that's my decision. That's the only time they appeal, if they come up with some kind of compromise or meet them halfway or.
I think, and we would probably require a written decision of the town administrator, so that way the issue is ripe, when the town administrator said, this is it, that's all. Otherwise, people could prematurely appeal when it has not been worked out at the staff level yet.
We make the town administrator's decision, it's in writing, and that makes it final.
Correct.
That makes it final for them to appeal.
That would make sense.
Does that give you your answer then, what you asked us?
I had a couple things. So on that point specifically, would it be appropriate to add final order, directive, interpretation, or decision? And this relates back to some other issues we've had with utilities code, where there's another section of the code that talks about interpreting the code and basically appeal anything to BOT. And I would like to keep it within the utilities code rather than ship it off to another part of the code. And so I think that may be one potential modification that could be made.
Just for clarification then, the appeal is, the clock for the appeal starts when the decision is made by the staff. So
In the administrator's written response.
administrator's written response, so within 10 days, the appeal has to be filed.
Correct.
If it's going to go to the Board of Trustees, there's no actual time, there's no total limit.
No, there's no time frame which it needs to go to BOT. I mean, there may be, I'd hate to put we'll come up the next regular meeting of BOT, just because who knows what can be in that.
Yeah, there are too many variables that can
Right.
affect that.
Sometimes we have 3 weeks between.
And I think we would make it, we would do it timely, otherwise
In a
we could take
timely
it
fashion.
directly to a court and say they never acted on it,
Right.
The result of that would probably be a court giving us an order saying, hear this appeal and come back, but,
Yeah, I was just pointing out, in the best of situations, it could be, 3 weeks easily, and, likely a little bit more. but that would still be considered timely, is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we would afford them, what limited due process they're due under this, if so long as we did it within a reasonable amount of time, which I think would be a handful of meetings.
Yeah, we shouldn't handcuff ourselves.
No, we
Having
shouldn't.
to hear this.
One more question on the appeal section before my questions are done. In regards to this, the decision, and so we had some discussion earlier about removing the part of it being in writing with the findings of fact, conclusions of law. But I was wondering if the board may do that for a particularly tough case. That way we have a really good record that can be appealed on a 106 motion to a court. And just give us the option in writing to say we can do that. Otherwise, one may argue that if we were to do that we didn't have the power to do it. And so just an option, I think, where we don't have to do a decision with findings of fact, conclusions of law, and in writing and all that stuff. But I think there may be some situations, and I've seen it in other contexts, where you want to do that in order to set a really good record for appeal.
I kind of did that once, so,
I remember that, yeah.
I think that's a good idea, make it optional.
Yep.
We're done with the...
Those are my questions.
So the next part of the workshop was the sampling portion. And for those who may not know, the sampling port, right, is adding a port or some type of mechanism that would allow the town or the town's appointed contractors or even the business owner the ability to test the wastewater for various pollutants. So why are we requiring a sampling port? Well, the Lyons wastewater utility has to meet the wastewater requirements that are set by the US EPA and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They're the ones who set the regulations for the wastewater plant. And they have limits on certain pollutants that can be in the wastewater. There are limits on what can go into the wastewater treatment plant, as well as limits on what can come out of the plant. And as we know, it goes into the St. Vrain River there. For a number of years, the plant has had higher than allowed amounts of certain pollutants going into the wastewater plant. In particular, there's been a lot of talk of the biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, as one of the pollutants that we've had trouble with. There are also new environmental regulations that are coming out, that continue to come out, that may be a concern also. The town recently developed a classification table based on industry standards to help understand which industries are more likely to have high levels of BOD. So I believe it was just last year and not 2 years ago, the wastewater code was amended to develop this classification table to say, are you in a category of standard residential levels of BOD, low levels of BOD, medium levels of BOD, and high levels of BOD. And the table was used to implement a surcharge on the businesses in these industries to cover the additional costs involved with handling the higher strength wastewater. There was also an option for commercial customers to show the town that their businesses do not have waste with the industry standard levels. So if you felt you weren't in that category, your business wasn't doing that, you could come to the town and see about getting the surcharge reduced. If you could show that you were not putting in the high levels of BOD, there's also a section that if you could show if you actually were not putting the water that you take, because the wastewater is determined by the volume of water. We're not measuring the water, the wastewater, we're measuring the water. So that if you could show your business was putting so much water into something and it wasn't going down the wastewater, that was also something you could show to reduce your surcharge. But it's not worked fast enough. There was the hope that this may also induce some of the customers to say, hey, I don't think I have that high level of BOD, therefore I'm going to do what it takes to put in this sampling port so that someone can come test and see that I don't have this, and then you wouldn't have to pay the surcharge if you were able to show you were really only at the residential level of BOD. There hasn't been a lot of time, but there's also been more concern about the Eastern Corridor not being able to go forward. We've had the recent complaint that was brought to you by CDPHE of the high levels of copper. So it's not worked fast enough to just allow other customers to actually try to measure and show that they are reducing their own BOD. So, the town is... So what the UEB was looking at was that the town really needs to adopt some local limits, as they're called, which is just some of the limitations on how much BOD can any one customer have, how much TSS, how much copper. And so once you set those local limits, you need to have a way to enforce or test those. And then once you set those local limits, the businesses that couldn't meet those would need to pre-treat their waste, which is where there's a lot of talk about pre-treatment. So, in order to enforce the local limits, the town would need to be able to test the individual wastewater. The town has the classification table indicating which industries are most likely to have high levels of BOD. The UEB thought a good starting point for a pre-treatment program would be to require businesses in the highest level of the table to have sampling ports so that the testing and monitoring of their high-strength pollutants can be done. The UEB also recommended including the ability to require sampling ports on other businesses that might come up as a concern for other reasons. So we wanted to make sure it wasn't just the high strength. If something came up that was unexpected, all of a sudden a new regulation was passed and they weren't in this category, but we know they're doing electroplating, and electroplating has certain chemicals that we can't have, we could try to include that. And so getting the sampling ports installed will take some time, and during that time, some of the additional components of a full pre-treatment program could be put together. We thought this would include developing the actual local limits that would be the pollutants that would be limited, and that we'd also try to put together some of what are best management practices or some of the options that businesses might have to try to pre-treat their specific wastes if they were found to be too high. But really the first step seemed to be having the ability to test the businesses that we have classified as a concern. And then we can start to develop, try to determine where our high levels are coming from, and then we'd have the local limits getting set by then of what their limitations actually are, and then what needs to be done to change that and prevent the pollutants. And that's what I had for trying to explain why we had the sampling port request.
Couple questions. Do we have a TS, total suspended solids violation notice? I saw some reference to that recently. Or is that, in the past, we really hadn't been had a problem with that.
We went through a period where we regularly exceeded TSS limits.
So say not
But we haven't
super
received like
recently.
a notice of violation because our effluent is still within the limits.
Okay.
It's just what's expected to go through the plant from the influent is way higher than what.
Because the BOD is actually what's written for whatever, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but our permit with the state says you can only have this limit of BOD going in.
It doesn't have
That-
TSS limit?
No, I'm pretty
Just on the
positive.
effluent.
Just on the
The water
effluent?
going back into.
So
the
there have been
limits.
times when we've been exceeded that, or what?
I don't know
I just
recently,
think that
but
what the facility was projected to have coming in was based on certain limits and we
Okay.
exceeded these.
Yeah, I just thought I saw some reference recently that there was a TSS.
The only
We exceeded a limit or something.
Recent were copper and the BOD.
Okay. All right. I thought, was Ramey going to come here at one point for this workshop and talk about different kinds of sampling ports?
Oh, yeah, he and Aaron have been talking now that we have Aaron.
I mean, because I've tried to look at that, and it's really hard to find stuff online when you don't know much about it. I mean, I know there's small grab sampling ports, and there's continuous flow monitoring ports, and there's composite sampling ports, and I don't, if you got any information about what would fit what businesses or what the range of costs would be?
No, because Ramey hasn't been able to look at the business. Yes, okay. No to having specific requirements for specific businesses at this time.
Right, I wasn't asking
This
that.
would be the range. So Ramey had recommended putting in some type of code standard and then having the ability to adjust it. If you can show that you meet the town's needs for sampling, then that would be okay. So if you can show that what you propose would actually work, it would be safe, it would give us what we need, it would give the access, then we can look at doing that.
But
I looked up some and have found a sampling port. I thought again that it would be in the packet. One of the examples that you can go out was $1,000, maybe $1,200 for the actual port. There would then be the cost to install that. Looking at that you could possibly get by. There's been talk of $3,000. I would say let's conservative and say $5,000 to try to put something in. I don't know the construction aspects quite enough to try to say what that would be. There are then, just to give you the other financial bigger limits, I had included in a previous packet, and could send it out again, the Yakima city standard, because they had a good documentation on the sampling port with some pictures, but they're requiring a full-blown 3-foot manhole and all the access to get down in there, and you're probably looking, when I talked to Raymond, about that $20,000 to try to put something like that in.
I mean, I assume it would vary some from business to business,
Right.
depending on how
And
much.
that's why you want to try to leave it that you have to meet the code, the staff would have to come out. We would have to have someone that can determine what works. Most likely that would be the contractor that we have that might have to do some of the sampling.
Would that be Ramey or the town engineer, or
Ramey.
is Ramey pretty familiar with this in other places, of which types of sampling ports are appropriate for which businesses?
He had seen online this particular sampling port that I sent him and was aware of it. He was going to try to call around and find somebody if he could look at one that was actually in process. I don't know how much they've done with reviewing the sampling ports before they put in. I would imagine they've done some. I could ask them that specifically. I know they work with a number of towns where they are the ones who have an agreement to go through the grease trap inspection and do other forms of enforcement for wastewater code concerns. So I would think they've also been set up to do some of the high-strength waste pretreatment limitation concerns.
But basically, essentially the town staff may be contracted out, Ramey. I don't know if the town engineers would get involved in this or not, but would sit down with each business and talk about what their, I mean, they already fill out a, what do you call it, a survey of what their, survey. Would review that, sit down with the businesses, talk with them about where it should go, because I understand that's important, on what part of their
Or there is the request to have it
effluent is.
outside or accessible if we really want to be able to test randomly whenever we want to go have someone test.
But also where you put it on their line. I talked to a lady in Longmont several months ago who does this stuff for industries in Longmont, and she said, for example, it's important that where you put the sampling port is not downstream of where the toilets and everything come in from businesses, because that will mix in with the industrial discharge and screw up your samples, basically. So both location, both in terms of accessibility and accuracy of testing, that's something that the town would want to determine, right, and work with the business on. Is that
Right.
okay? Okay, thanks.
Trustee Farrell.
I was just wondering,
currently, what are some of the businesses thinking right now in terms of doing their own testing? And are we seeing any results from them doing their own testing?
I haven't heard anyone come in and actually say, what else could I do to reduce my BOD surcharge? I haven't, it's only been a few months since I would have heard anything specific that I've been a staff person. There have been businesses that have come in and looked at showing how much water they actually use in their product, and therefore the water is not going down the wastewater system. But that's the only concerns I've heard from.
Okay, and then I wanted to bring up, because to me, when I was looking at the Amendment A, and it says at the bottom that it's dated 11/19/2018, but we have a handout. I went back and was trying to look at all of my notes and everything, and we did a handout that Mayor Sullivan provided on 12/13/18, and it was in more detail of what I thought we approved and passed than what's showing up here that was provided to us. So I'm wondering if what we're seeing in the packet is outdated and not what was actually passed later. But I was having a really hard time, and then when I went online to find the updates in our code online, there's nothing there. It's really dated. So one of my thoughts was tonight was saying, I don't think we should even be getting to pass this on first reading either, because I feel like the information's not the most current.
Did you think
So if you looked at page 134, and maybe I need to do this during the meeting, but if you look at page 134 in the packet, it's Exhibit A,
right?
Section 13-4-80. But when I scrolled down through it and I started reading it, I thought, this does not read the way I thought we had made some changes. And then I see it's dated down in blue, 11/19/18. But I know we had a workshop on the 3rd of December.
Well, this one, A does have the changes in it.
Some, but it doesn't have everything, and the numbers are not the same.
Well, it
And
has even our current changes, like F, G, H, and I are not old code. I'm wondering, right, if Exhibit A is the new code as we proposed it. I'm gonna look at what there's two sets. One's the ordinance and one's Exhibit A.
Exhibit A is the red line copy.
Doesn't show up red line.
No, it doesn't. And so that's why I just,
I don't know what happened, yeah.
she kind of went into a lot of detail about breaking this out so that it was much more understandable to
Who's she?
Mayor Sullivan, to the lay people like me. And so it feels amiss to me, and I feel like we don't necessarily have the most current information, so I really wanted to check that. And so,
Right, we have to check. I don't know, again, where to check for the
right,
official.
because you can't find it online.
What's the other one? Just show, I'm trying to pull up the agenda version now, because I have the originals I have up. They're both red lines, and A's for both ordinances. Was the other ordinance?
And you're not seeing it.
I see 0 red lines at all.
It's a lot of red line.
It's a lot of red lines. Yeah.
There's no red line.
We'll send that to you right now, just so you'll have it.
Okay.
And then, I've already written to Dolores and let her know that there's ever some mix-up with the workshop.
Well,
But there was no workshop materials at all. That's not
right. So,
There's supposed to be more workshop materials on this.
Yes,
on
there's all of Brenda's red lines on this.
yeah, so,
But that wasn't, the ordinance wasn't in the workshop. I didn't have that, I was going over, I had other samples.
I mean, this is kind of what I was having, I went and read this, thinking this is what was going to apply to the workshop.
the
It is the discussion, I would be
Right.
giving more discussion on why we would be doing it, what we would be doing it, and And that should be the actual ordinance that you want to question now.
So I just think that we're unprepared with all the information tonight.
If it's not right, that's fine. Verify if
It
it's
can table.
correct.
We are working on fixing the codification of this.
I had asked Dolores too, if somebody was changing the code online, that
I mean, this is over a year old.
They updated the codification just less than a few months ago.
But when they did so, they knocked out the entire wastewater code.
Sort of.
Right, well, but it's,
when,
there's been other things that I've tried to search for and I can't even begin to find.
I was going to have a question about that when we got to accounts payable tonight. I was going to pull that and ask. Anyway,
So,
my question about this draft is somewhat similar, and I sent an email about this a few days ago. It has a subparagraph K in it. The first down through J, it's really all about testing and sampling ports. It's got a subparagraph K that gets into pretreatment. It's like a one-paragraph pretreatment ordinance. And that, to me, seemed like it was probably jumping the gun a little bit. If we're going to do a pretreatment ordinance at the same time as a sampling port ordinance, we're going to, I think, need more attention to the pretreatment part of it. If you take subparagraph K out of there, and I know that would probably only come up on second reading, but we're discussing this in workshop, just where we're going with this, then it's just a sampling port ordinance. And so I guess that's something I'm throwing out for the board. Do we want to try to deal with pretreatment at the same time as a sampling port, or just do a sampling port ordinance now? And if so, then the subparagraph K really probably belongs in a separate pretreatment ordinance. I guess that's my point that I think we ought to discuss.
it was trying to let people know why we would be requiring
Sure.
sampling ports, but I can see if there was concern about what the actual regulations are going to be, that you do want to do more with that. Right, so K was all customers required to have wastewater testing will be required to meet the town wastewater local limits.
But we don't know what those are yet.
Right, but we know they're going to need to meet it.
And they'll change.
I don't think you would need the local limits, that part in particular. I don't think you need to know the local limits to know that you're putting in the sampling port. They would require the sampling port, and we can work on getting the local limits. If we're going to do the local limits, that's going to take a while.
Right.
The UEB has tried to do this a little bit at a time just for the trustees to also digest it, because we've been doing it for a number of years, and it seems to get kicked back on too much, too big. On the other parts then of K are, this includes but is not limited to the amount of certain metals, biochemical oxygen demand, total suspended solids found in the wastewater. Wastewater that does not meet these local limits must be pre-treated to remove the excess pollutant.
So, I mean, you've kind of got a pretreatment, general pretreatment requirement with that sentence. And I think we all know, I think the board is well aware of what the ultimate goal is here. I mean, CDP, HE, and EPA have basically told us, what are you doing? You need to do this. And JVA told us you're going to have to do this. Or they're going to come in and do it for us, and their ordinance may not be something we like. I know I was looking at Littleton's experience. I think, Brandon, your name popped up in a memo that I saw online of, yeah. So I think Littleton had that experience right.
Probably my memo, right?
It could be. No, it was like a town utilities director or something, and I think he mentioned you. But I think that's what happened in Littleton, right?
Exactly what happened.
They never got their own done. EPA came in and said, thou shalt do this. And they ended up with
Here's your fine.
an encyclopedia, basically.
It's huge. Yeah,
And then as far as the date, 11/19/2018, I think that's when the classification table was codified.
yeah, but there's,
So,
For sure.
I mean,
So I think that's why that date was there. That was the original, when I pulled it from the code. And I don't think anything was changed after that was done.
Okay.
But I
I
don't.
mean, it's up to the board, but I'm just expressing my
And that's
opinion.
right, in case of that particular part I could see has more concern. The wastewater that
Right.
does not meet these local limits must be pre-treated to remove the excess pollutant. If you want it, again, we thought it was just having something in there so that people are aware of what's happening. But if there's a concern that that needs to be more detailed, Right, some places can give you 4 or 5 pages worth of documentation on that, and some just say whatever the town administrator wants. So we can go the wide spectrum.
I mean, I guess,
We can go.
Brandon, procedurally, if we wanted to try to remove that subparagraph K, that should be done at second reading. I mean, if we wanted to move to delete it, that would be something we could propose at second reading.
First readings, and I would recommend that it be done in second reading, and actually be reviewed.
Yeah, we usually don't take that up at first reading. So anyway, I just noticed that, but agreed. I don't, I think the board knows that we've been told multiple times that the pre-treatment ordinance is probably where we're headed, whether we do it ourselves or somebody does it for us. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime, we couldn't do a testing port ordinance to basically get the ball rolling.
That would actually go a long way with the state.
That's what I was wondering. I mean, because if what you said in this memo was the EPA and CDPHE have continued to request documentation on what the town is doing to get pretreatment requirements, and I guess if we got a sampling port ordinance on the books, we could tell them, well, we've taken step 1, we got this done, we're working on pretreatment, and JVA basically told us you need to do this. So, okay.
Yeah, that is, and again, unless there's somewhere else to look, you can get into the municipal code online if anyone needs to go to 13.4, even though it's not there. If you go to 13.3 or 13.5 and scroll up or down, you can get into the code. Hopefully, whoever the municipal code online is going to, muni code is going to do something about that. But the code as it is in there is the code that's online, and it's the code I assumed was what passed. And I'm not sure, where would you check if it's not here? We'd have to pull the ordinances, which I can try to look through for now.
Did you have a running copy of the code before it was codified as well?
Yes, but that's gone through revision, so I wouldn't have used my copy. I took what was on the Muni code, assuming that was updated, since it's been updated twice since then, so it wouldn't have been caught. If that code is not right, it was not caught last year or this year. So that's why I would assume that code is right, but.
We just know in the latest codification of the code, numerous issues throughout the code popped up where things were not what had been passed. And so we have been trying to whack-a-mole those.
It looked like this one, it included the BOD surcharge with the categories and all that kind of stuff.
It does.
Which is really the last thing we've done in that area. So it's there, you have to scroll down to make it pop up, but I think what's online is.
There was an issue with the annexation water dedication requirement, and there was an issue with the fire suppression taps, where what had been codified was not what was passed. And so I thought when we last tried to fix those issues, that's when the wastewater issue popped up.
Do you want me to have Dolores come in?
What's that?
Do you want Dolores?
We're running out of time, we got some other questions to go
Yeah.
to.
Trustee Bowers?
I just wanted to say that I think it was clear the board expressed intent to pass a requirement for a testing port as a discrete action, and that seems pretty clear regardless of what our existing limits may be or as they develop or what they will become, what future substances will be limited that aren't today. I think the only pertinent question is, are we requiring a port that's adequate for making the measurements that we'll need to take in the future?
So we weren't listing in the code any specific, we weren't saying you need a port that's this. Right, that section says it's up to staff.
So otherwise, I don't see the reason we have anything holding us back from moving forward with this. We just wanted to require install with a substantial amount of time to do so. Say we continue to delay this action that's very, very late. It just delays the time that we can require then businesses meeting the requirements.
We had listed June, that's picking that 2020 for those that were in the high strength category.
Okay, Trustee Carvis?
When it comes to the state or the EPA, when they decide to come in, Brandon, does it go strictly, like what they did to Littleton? Does it just hit the board and town staff, or can they outreach to individual businesses themselves and demand?
They can do both.
They can do
They
both.
can do both.
So the longer we delay this, we potentially are putting our own businesses in harm's way of the EPA coming down on them individually.
We've had a business shut down by the EPA directly.
Okay.
Yeah, each individual business has independent obligations outside of the town,
Yeah.
not to, have a NIPD's violation or wastewater
Okay.
violation. So it's upon all of us, not just the town, but also the individual businesses, to comply with the federal regulations.
What does that look like when they do that?
They
I
come
mean,
in and just.
Demand, whack-a-mole demand? I mean,
Yeah, cease and desist, and here's your
You will
fine.
shut down, and here's your,
Okay.
notice of violation, NOV, they call it. And usually that is accompanied by, was essentially a settlement saying, here's your corrective actions you will take.
Mhm.
Or the attached complaint will be filed in court next week.
okay, thank you.
I used to work for EPA too.
No, that's,
That works.
yeah, I just want to get that out there. Thank you.
And then they can also come to the town and.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And then find us for why aren't you.
Doing something fast enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why aren't you enforcing the rules
Yep.
that the state has set for you? And so the more we can do to get this in place, it's showing we're making those efforts.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
I'll reserve mine for later.
If not, I guess we will commence with the regular meeting in about 12 minutes.
Took me a while to find that memo. I found the memo you're talking about that I did write. It took me a while to find it.
Oh, yeah, I was just researching various cities and I saw some memo that the Littleton Utilities Director did to the, I think, the town board. And
Yeah.
your name popped up.
Yep. Yeah, it was, yeah. And that happened prior to us being interim town attorney, kind of walked into it.
They mentioned like 2 different EPA compliance audits or something like that.
Right.
I assume those are probably no fun to do.
No, you don't, I mean, they do everything, they look through every single, it's, when they, EPA does a compliance audit, they look for the thing that you guys ding for, but also anything else they can find as well. So it's not fun. And Littleton has a joint wastewater treatment plant with Inglewood.
So it was in both cities, things, yeah. Payables and things. Doesn't take payables off the consent.
Well, it could be, because it doesn't do
Why should we pay it?
the chart about how.
Oh, yeah. No, that started, as I brought that up,
I'm like him. You look in there, it doesn't show up on the side where you normally click on it.
Yeah.
Go to the thing right above it.